My name is Natalia Urtubey. I'm the Director of Engagement for Imagine Boston 2030. Thank you all for being here tonight. This is a part of a series called Boston by the Numbers. We've done a few other themes as far as the research and the trends that are informing the Imagine Boston document. Very quickly, restrooms are towards the center of the, like right by the entrance to the left, all the way in the far back. If anybody needs to go, please make sure to help yourself with coffee and donuts. We also have some executive summaries of our newly released plan called Expanding Opportunity. They're right at the front. And I'm going to be a nag and ask everybody to please sign in or highlight your name if you RSVP so we know who's in the room, whether it's on your way out or I'll pass around a sign-in sheet. I'd like to start off by introducing Rebecca Emanuel, who is our Executive Director of Imagine Boston 2030, who will give an overview about the plan, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Thank you all for being here.
Awesome. I can't tell you how excited I am to be here tonight. It's sort of a nice way to gather tonight, given sort of where we're at, and this being the overall topic, sort of big picture. So, how many of you have a vision for how you want to see Boston in the future? Things that you'd like to see, new or different? Amazing. So that's most of us. And I think the big question is, how can we get from where we are today to that vision that you have? And that is the project, the work of Imagine Boston. And so the starting place, the sort of first step we said was, great, let's get all of those visions and try and pull them together. So we talked to over 12,000 people, and it's growing by the day, about what their vision is.
Hello.
Is this easier or is this easier? Yeah? Okay. So we talked to over 12,000 people, gathered their vision, and the second thing we did is we grabbed all of the trends and big focus areas that we know are going to be happening over the next 15 years and beyond. What are the things that we're sure are going to impact Boston's future? We put those together and we identified sort of what we think is going to shape us. The second thing we did was we identified big goals for what we want Boston to look like, and that came from everyone's vision. There's 5 of them. And the work of Imagine Boston is to get us from where we are today, to the kind of vision and the goals that we have. And so what we're going to talk about today specifically is the topic of immigration. Now, 2 of the big trends that drive Boston right now are the fact that we have an incredibly productive economy and workforce, and the fact that more and more people are living in Boston and calling Boston home. And a lot of that productivity and a lot of that growth is driven by our immigrants. And so that's the topic today. And what we're going to start with, sort of part 1 of today, is to give you all of the interesting numbers that give more color to what that actually looks like. And Alvaro here knows tons about this, and probably if you ask a question, he'll know tons more than even what's on the screen. And part 2 is that we're shaping vision for what a long-term plan to support the immigrant members of Boston looks like, and we'd love to have a bit of a discussion here today on what your thoughts are on that. So with that, I will turn it over to Alvaro.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I would try in the next 20-25 minutes to tell you 2 stories, one about Boston, the other one about immigrants, and I hope by the end I show you that that's the same story, that you cannot separate these 2 stories, and that has been in the history of this city, has been a long trend of this love affair of Boston and immigrants. So let me get you. So if we look at the last 20 years in Boston, at a very aggregated level, the trends are very positive. the city is growing, the population is becoming younger, the population is becoming more educated, become more diverse. So all the trends, it's in favor of the city, and there are few cities in this country that in the last 20 years, starting from where Boston started with the crisis in the 80s, Boston, Chicago, New York kind of came back. Detroit is still struggling with that phase. But when we look at the trends, we're trying to ask, so what is driving these trends? And that's where we saw how important the immigrant community is for Boston. So if you look at the population of Boston, so Boston grew until the 1950s. That was the height of the population, was 800,000 people. Then there was the process of folks leaving the city, suburbanization, and the population decreased to the lowest level that was 562,000 people. Since then, Boston has been growing, and since 2010, Boston has been going very fast. The last 4 data from the census, from the American Community Survey, this is accelerating. So it's not a trend, it's now a strong trend that is becoming a sustainable growth of the population. And in the beginning was kind of, maybe this is just a blip of the data, maybe this is just a process that doesn't have legs, but for today we have 6 years of data showing that this growth is sustainable, and it's actually increasing. If you look at the other trend, that is the age of the population, Boston is still a very young, has a very young population compared to the state and the country. We have an average population age of 31 years to 37, 39 for the state and for the country. And that is it's also a process that will continue, because behind this age of the population, you have 2 factors. One are immigrants that come on the age of work, and they have less children, and they have less elderly. And you have the other factor, the universities, the colleges pushing young people in the town. So we have this process that unless something really drastic shift, like immigration reform, or enrollment in schools, and it's very hard that the universities will change very soon, even with the whole online, so you will still have the campus. So the other trend is the level of education. So this is the level of education with BA applies in the country is around 30%. In Boston is around 43%, and it's growing. It's the 8th most educated city in the country. It's comparable cities. And this is an incredible asset if you calculate, for example, what we did, what is the productivity behind this level of education. And this is also, in partly, is driven by the university. So we bring a lot of students, we hire the ones that we need, and then they become alumni and send a check to the university. So it's a great business model. And it became more diverse. In 2000, Boston became a minority-majority city. That was, at the time, kind of, it could be a statistical error because it was 51 something. By 2010, it was very clear that this was a trend very strong in the city. And if you look at these 4 factors, these 4 trends that actually drive population growth and drive the labor force, immigrants are behind of all of them. If you look at the growth of the population, almost all the growth in the population from 2000 to today is foreign-born. So you have a population that's growing on the base of the foreign-born. And if you walk through this city, you are going to bump into, foreign-born janitors, foreign-born professors, foreign-born students, foreign-born scientists, the doctor, there's the hospitals that you go, the nurses. So this is a process that is maintaining the capacity of the city to grow. And it's not, the foreign-born is not demographical, is not only important because you have more people, but also because they have more babies. And 40% of the births in Boston are from foreign mothers. So it's not only that you're foreign-born, you're increasing the population, you're also increasing the population of native-born. I contributed with 2. I stopped there, but I had 2 kids born here. So that's the kind of that division between foreign-born and native-born. It's so you can't separate because there is an intrinsic link between one population and the other. And the city is diverse, and most of this diversity is provided by the foreign-born, mostly by Haitians and Hispanic population. That were the growth of the population. You have the white population shrink as a percentage of the total population. The African American population almost stable, and the Haitian and the Asian and the Hispanic population growing. So, and that is what is creating more diversity in the city. So there is also an inversion on this diversity. So most of the immigrants today in Boston are not from Europe, they are from Latin America and Asia. And from Latin America, it's a myriad of countries and nationalities, and also from Asian and East Asian. It's become very diverse because of that flux of Hispanics and Asians. These are the top 10 countries of origin in Boston, with Chinese being the largest segment of the immigrant population. And then you have Dominicans, Haitian, Cape Verdean, El Salvador, Vietnam, Colombia, Jamaica, and Guatemala. So you can see the importance of the immigration from Latin America on these top countries. So this is spatially, this is how Boston is becoming diverse. That is the population, that's the foreign-born population from 1970 to today. And you started with a concentration in Chinatown, and then you have a diversification, every neighborhood of foreign-born with a concentration in Chinatown, Manhattan, and East Boston. That's the largest concentration of Latin American, Chinese, and Haitian. And that's important because it's not only, we did this work in 2000. So in 2000, when Boston became a minority-majority city, there was lots of discussions, and the Globe wrote some articles, and there was a big confusion between being a minority-majority city and being diverse. So if you are going to a neighborhood, say Manhattan, it's a majority-minority neighborhood, but if the big bulk of the population is Haitian, is not very diverse. So what we did in here was to calculate at the census tract level, what is the probability, if you are from a race and ethnicity, to find somebody different than you. So if you are in a census tract where everybody is Brazilian, the probability of finding a non-Brazilian is 0. If everybody is from a different nationality, the probability is 1. So we calculate all these probabilities in all census tracts in the city from 1970 to today, and then map to actually see, because there is part of the city that have become less diverse, and there's part of the city that's become more diverse. And the city as a whole has become very diverse, because there is a lot of movement. But for us, and we did that not only for foreign-born, we did for race and ethnicity, age, income, language spoken. So because we're looking, so how is that the city is moving, and how the city is changing, in what direction, in what aspects. So, in general, if you forget the discussion about immigrants and bad people taking jobs, all that thing, when the discussion is a little bit more serious, it's always a discussion about demographics, the importance of immigrants for the population. It's rarely that the discussion is about the economy. And if the question was just population, it was a pretty easy discussion. The problem is that Boston cannot reproduce itself as a population on the basis of the native born. So the foreign born is a demographic necessity of the city, but more important, Boston cannot reproduce the standard of living that we have now if you net the foreign-born population. I will show you why is that. So this is a graphic that shows 1990 and 2010. This is the population without immigrants. This is the population with immigrants. If you net foreign-born, the population of Boston today, 2010, would be smaller than 1990. So you had a city that was shrinking, and that's true also for New England. If you look at the labor force in 1990 and in 2010, so this is the size of the labor force in 2010, this is the size of the labor force in 2010 with immigrants. So if you net the immigrant population, you have closer to 2/3 of the labor force that you need to maintain a standard of living. What I mean by that, I will take this labor force, the level of education, and calculate for that level of education what is the level of productivity. And then I'll calculate for that one what is the level of productivity. And that's what would happen to us. So with this labor force, we will have each one of us, we will have $6, $7 of production. With the immigrant population, we have $8, $7. So mainly you have more folks producing more stuff. If you divide by the total population, and the population is growing, even if the population is growing, you will have more production. So this is mainly a measure of productivity. And so it's not only that there is a demographic necessity, there is also an economic necessity. And the economic necessity is, for a city like Boston, it's crucial because you can look at any sector from service to biotech, and all of them is populated with foreign-born. If you look at the labor force, if you look at the other side, that are the consumers, you can think about, for example, higher education, where you have huge foreign-born students. And you can look, for example, tourism, huge amounts of tourists. And the risk with that's the elephant in the room today, that's what's happened past tomorrow, is that a city that, or a country where you are not comfortable as a foreign-born resident, you will not be comfortable as a foreign-born student, you will not be comfortable as a foreign-born professor, you will not be comfortable as a tourist. So, and Boston, in all these dimensions, is one of the cities, few cities in the country that has its growth, its character, its history tied up in that manner. If you are in, say, Detroit, you are not really at risk. If you are in Boston, if you are in Miami, San Francisco, New York, so all your economies wrap up with the role of foreign-born and with the necessity of having this labor force, and of course you can't get the labor force, can get labor without getting people. So there is a link between the growth of the population, the foreign-born population, and the growth of the labor force. So it's pretty worrying what can be happening for a city like Boston because of this, the importance of foreign-born if immigration reform gets to be complicated. So one thing that during the working for the Imagine Boston 2030 is where we're looking at, one, establish that this is important, then establishing, so what are the problems that we have here so that we can have goals and solve and understand these problems. And there is some barriers to integration of immigrants in Boston. English proficiency is one of those. You have a population that's growing, so the number of folks with English proficiency is reducing, but you still have a big chunk of folks that need support on that, and there is tons of research between productivity and language. You have to pass a certain level. You need to be able to read instruction, follow instruction, transfer instruction from one level to the other. This is a big problem. The level of education is also a big problem. There's a lot of folks with less than high school, and that is, I'm an economist. I look at that, and then my head asks, what is the productivity behind that, and what is happening to the economy? And you have also a distortion in the labor market where for the same level of education, the foreign-born makes less money than native-born. And that can be status discrimination, can be many things, recertification, non-validation of diploma. You have a master's degree, but you don't speak English. You don't have documents to work. So there is a series of, these problems are never, I used to say that these are very complicated problems, and they have always a simple answer, and it's always wrong. It's teach English. If you teach English for somebody that learning the language, but cannot recertificate their education, so they will speak English and work on the same job because they can't be doctors or lawyers. So behind this, there are lots of complex things that the is here from the Office of Immigrant Advancement. So this is problems that they tackle on a day-to-day with documentation, being a citizen, speaking the language, going to school. So there is an effort to deal with these problems, and they are not kind of what we call a stock problem. You have X number of people that you have to solve the problem. This is flow problem, so you solve a bunch of problems, more immigrants coming because you need them, so you continue to have the same problem. And also, so this is a graphic that I was teaching a class, and we were talking about integration and what is the process of integration. And mainly you have two processes. You have one that's downward integration. So the most, what people associate with that is the doctor that's a cab driver. And you have a problem because you cannot be a doctor, so you drive in cabs. So that can happen. And when this happens anecdotally, it's not a problem. If this is happening on a certain scale, so you mainly create a whole class of people that could do a certain job, could succeed, but cannot succeed because there is some barriers. Or you can integrate upward if you have the resources and you don't have some of these barriers where you can go to school and the valedictorians are the best example where you have all these kids that then go to college and succeed. And what determines these two paths is what we call the opportunity structure. So what are the opportunities that are open to you so that you can advance? So if you are in a country that have a very liberal immigration policy, it's very easy for you to solve the problem of documentation and then you can be a doctor and work. If you have if you immigrate to a country that speaks your language, or if you immigrate to a country that have enough resources that you can speak your language to eliminate these problems. And so we try, I do a lot of work with the Brazilian community. So we were trying to map these on a specific community. So what are the main barriers that is pushing back or advancing in the Brazilian community? Is the conditions that they enter the country? They had no documentation, their education level was low, or are the conditions that they encounter that we call this structure of opportunity that kind of open up avenues for them to succeed in a more easy way. So this, with nobody knows what is going to happen in this country past tomorrow. If this structure are shrinking, or if it's enlarged or staying the same. And you can imagine if this, and this is just some example, if this structure, instead of opening the space, you are closing this space, so you can have a huge journey around on that. And for a city like Boston, like depending on immigrants, the narrower this path, the biggest is the problem in the present, and huge are the problems in the future, because it's not just a labor problem, you may be creating a class of people that cannot succeed, and we already have them, so we have all this. It's one example that's incredible, that was the DACA, that from one day to the other, you have 600,000 kids that change their lives. They can work, they can go to school, so that this structure of opportunity enlarged, and the country is much better for it, and they are much better in their path. Or if you eliminate that or kind of narrow other paths, you will pay a price on productivity and the growth of the population. So it's to me, it's a problem that worries me, not only on the security of people, but also what that can do to an economy in a city like Boston, particularly given all the trends that I show you, that they're all going in a direction, in a positive direction for a city that has a history from 1950 to 80 of declining population, of crisis, of economic crisis, and so it's worrying, but we'll do what we have to do, and I hope that through the planning process we can push some of these things, that whatever is happening. I know the mayor is very committed to this. He has publicly said that Boston will not change its way. It doesn't matter what happens. Thank you.
All right, so we will open it up for questions. We have a couple people from the city here, and I'm going to put some people on the spot because I think it's important to know who's in the room, and we're going to answer all the questions that we can. So we have John from our policy team, if you just wave. John works in the economic development team. We have Ann up here, who works with Health and Human Services in the Immigration Department. And then we have Amy Mahler, who leads our Spark Boston, which is our young professionals network for the city of Boston. We have Inez back there from our IGR team, and then obviously, intergovernmental relations. Sorry about that. And then obviously Rebecca Emanuel from Imagine Boston 2030, and Jackie up here, who is one of the mayor's fellows. So we're here to answer any questions you might have about the presentation, about Imagine Boston and the plan itself. If we can answer, we will, and if we can't, we will find you the answer. So with that, we'll take some questions. Yes, Alex, sorry.
Hi, I just wanted some clarity around the flag. When you talked about the neighborhood
if you look at Boston as a whole, it's very hard to find a neighborhood that didn't become more diverse than it was before. At the same time, you have some neighborhoods in Boston where it became more segregated. So you have a process of diversification and segregation at the same time. And that's why we will look at mainly some that's fine, East Boston, Chinatown, part of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Manhattan. And then you have outside that it's become more diverse, but on that spine is becoming more segregated, even though in the last 6 years, it has changed also on that spine, particularly Roxbury, that became more diverse than in 2000, 2010. So it's a process that it's for as a demographic process, it's a process that's happening very fast, how the city is changing.
Can I add on to that? So Alvaro showed this really interesting graph. It's one of my favorites of how, oops, where's the GIF that changes?
Which one?
Where you see the map of Boston change. So basically there's one graph that shows where are our foreign-born populations living in the city of Boston. There's another map that looks a lot like this that we can, if you email us, we can show you more, that shows where are people, if they encounter another person in that census tract, likely to meet someone with a similar background to them or a different one. And that's a measure of diversity. That's not what we're showing here, but there's another one like that. And that shows the diversity or the segregation. Sometimes people think, oh, if you add up all of Boston, just the percentage of foreign-born will tell you how diverse you are. Actually, part of what Alvaro is saying is that there's a double click there about how much are we living integrated versus living segregated. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. And there's other process that you have to, it's very hard because you don't have data that is, if you look at a neighborhood, the best example is at South Boston. If you look at the South End, it's probably one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Boston. But the diversity, if you look demographically, if you look economically, it's one of the most segregated. So you have the Mandela Project and the $1 million economy, and these are not folks that are going to the same restaurants, to the same supermarket. So it's diverse here, but there is a problem there. But that's a more difficult collection of data. It's mainly primary data or knowledge by people.
Do you have any data that drills down a little bit among immigration statuses and what percentage are undocumented versus citizens, or is it just all the plumb of foreign-born?
We have, so there is no data on who is documented or not. So we create a proxy for that was looking at when you enter in the country, and then what was your level of education. So we create a bunch of proxies and say, so probably these folks are documented and probably these folks are not documented. But there is no number for that. But we try to create a proxy for that. Actually, we did a report for the Office of Immigrant Enforcement. That's not a report, we did a memo. Just saying, there's no answer for that, but if you create this proxy, it could be, it's the only thing you have to go by.
And can we get your PowerPoint?
Yes.
Sure.
So we will be posting the PowerPoint on our website sometime tomorrow, and you can find that under under the About section. You'll see Boston by the numbers, and within you'll see all the different presentations so far.
I'm just going to show you where it is here. So if you go, so this is the imagineboston.gov. You can just find that via Googling. Here, this is about, and there's Boston by the numbers. Those are all the reports on statistics on Boston, in case you're interested in those. Also, if you're interested in an overview of the report,
You have it up in the third tab.
yeah, but if you're just Googling, you can go under, oops, oh, sorry. Let's see here.
Get it.
So
There you go.
you can go under imagineboston.gov/expanding opportunity. There's an overview of the document, the actual 300-pager executive summary, and then we want all your comments and feedback, so please give those to us as well.
Go to the homepage.
Yep.
So from here, it's the left circle. We'll get you right to that page.
Right there. So Google is all you need.
Yes.
I don't really know how to answer this question, so bear with me. As far as your data with social media and the fact that typically groups that speak the same language will identify on social media with people they're comfortable with, and I'm wondering how this change in social media connectivity is skewing the ability for integration on an actual physically interactive and environmental crossover.
I haven't seen data on immigrants. I have seen lots of data on so there's a research done by the Media Lab that the hope of the internet is that everybody will be linked to everybody else, and we will know everybody will know each other. And what the internet did, in fact, was that you choose only people that have the same opinion. And if you are in Facebook and they say something you don't like, you just unfriend them. And if you like somebody that you read, and so that's cool, and you become friend, and that's actually creating more segregation on the society than having this great thing that everybody will connect. What I think is happening on the immigrant community, yes, they speak mostly among themselves. So if you go to Facebook and Google Brazilians, there is at least 70 Brazilians in Massachusetts, Brazilians in New York, Brazilians in... So these are groups of Brazilians speaking with Brazilians. And the cross is from here to Brazil, or from here to Brazilians in another country. What they use the internet, but it's still Brazilians, but it's good to cross geography, it's not too good to cross ethnic groups.
Other questions?
So I'm wondering if there is any sort of data available on the students who pass out of the schools from Boston, if they join the workforce, or the increase in workforce is due to some other reason, as opposed to the students joining the workforce after they graduate from school?
There's data on how much of the students are joining the workforce. Boston attracts, so there's two things in relation to students. One is we attract way more students than we can employ, because we have 75 universities drawing people from all over the world, and there is no market in Boston to absorb them. That's one thing. The other one is actually in our website we have a paper that we wrote on that because there was a report about brain drain that we disagreed that there was a brain drain. We're pushing a lot of people in and keep the ones with the labor market absorbed. So the other one is that the recruitment of the university doesn't have any relationship with the job market in Boston. I mean, for example, you have course for anthropologists in every university. We hire one anthropologist to find a job in university, the old guy at the time. But you train anthropologists from all over the world. And we did a calculation that was, okay, we are losing all these folks, let's do a calculation that we just keep all of them. So we'll blow up the labor market of Boston. Will be a city of 80 million people in 10 years, and so it doesn't. And you have more doctors than patients, more dentists than tooth. So it's every politician will have 15 people from the Kennedy School. So the Kennedy School is a good example. We got people from all over the world, and they go and you go back and you keep some. And if the oils are very trained, you'll see a huge unemployment rate in Boston because you don't have people, but the unemployment rate now is 3%, and we still attract more students and more students in the
I have a question. First of all, just logistically, you showed these different please comment. So there's one where you click the link and you have these fields, these comment fields. Okay, so that's one. And my question is, first of all, when is that due? I'm sorry, deadline driven, you know?
We'd love to have your comments in the next 3 weeks, but if you get them to us after the next 3 weeks, we will still care about them.
So
3 weeks.
yeah, so we'll
Let's
be
see.
coming out with the second draft after this, and then there'll be the final draft. So
All right, I definitely want to get it on the first.
great.
So that would be 3 weeks from today.
Would be
let's say?
wonderful, yeah,
So why don't we just call it early February?
that's great.
And, okay, and my other question about this logistics is if it was, let's say, too long and you wanted to email them, I just email them to you.
And
And same deadline, same deal.
yep, you can email as much text as you'd like to imagine@boston.gov.
Right. Now, I do have more questions, but I won't hog the floor. I just do it kind of at one at a time. I'm an environmental scientist, and it's kind of crazy being, doing environment here in Boston, but, and you have this economist perspective, and you're saying that Boston depends on immigrants, and it's kind of this infinite growth model, and from an environmental perspective, you just can't have this infinite growth. So I guess I'm just wondering about that because I notice in the Imagine Boston 2030 plan, what I call it, it's very much a very positive treatment of the issues. It's kind of like J.P. Rock's plan. And I nickname it, that Lego theme, everything is awesome. And it just, there's no treatment of adverse impacts to growth or the trade-offs in growth.
So you're worried about how growth impacts especially the environment, so
What?
we're gonna have a much longer conversation.
No, I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
I'm just saying that this plan needs to talk about the trade-offs with the infinite growth model. And when you say that growth is critical for the city, I mean, we all acknowledge, and you mentioned it too, I mean, at some point, the rate of growth, we have to be concerned about just that and quality of life issues. So that's sort of my first,
So-
I'm just curious what you
Yeah,
have to
so
say.
two things. One is all the data that I showed here is past data. So what I'm saying is that that's the growth trajectory of the city. And as an economist, so population and labor force growth go together. And you can calculate what is the level of productivity and what is the level of the standard of living for the determinant labor force given the education distribution. So I agree with you, it's a trade-off. And the trade-off in Boston, historically, when you look the 1910 to 1950, 1950 to 1980, that's a huge trade-off. The population shrinks and the economy shrinks. So the question is, projecting to the future, what is the rate of growth that maintain that standard of living or growing, employ the population, because the population is growing, so you have to create jobs, at the same time managing all the environmental impacts and neighborhood impacts, social impacts that necessarily comes with that. mean, if you just, kind of Houston growth, just go and build and expand, and there is no transportation. So there's a huge impact. If it's a growth that is managed, and what goes with transportation, so you could maintain a rate of growth that maintains a standard of living. So my bias as an economist, I come from the standards of living, and you give all the trade-offs, and they'll give you what's the population that you need to produce that labor force, independent where the labor force comes, if it's local or foreign war. But that is, economically, that is the trade-off of I can reduce the labor force so that the population goes to rate. But it's not infinite growth, because if I project in an infinite growth, I grow the economy, the housing market, everything, because you can't grow 4% a year and compound that, so you end up with.
And happy to talk more about the tricky components of that, and I'm also happy to point you to the places in the plan where we highlight some of the things that are tricky.
Good.
Two more questions, and then we'll just transition to more of a sort of joint discussion on sort of thinking about the future of how Boston can support immigrants in our city, which is one of the areas. Go for it.
So picking up on the population question,
Yeah.
the mayor in his address gave a one-liner that was pretty stunning. No further elaboration, which is that Boston will be a climate-neutral city by 2050,
Yeah.
which is a staggering ambitious declaration. And at the same time, you do have this very dramatic growth. And there are all these studies that are now coming out, and I was curious as to how you weave the studies together, and also when the mayor drops one of those gems, what do you do with it?
So you are asking a lot about our role. So the mayor has done this really fabulous thing, which is that he's been willing to look forward a lot, and there's over 17 different plans that focus on very specific elements of Boston. Go Boston focuses on transportation. Climate Ready Boston, what's up here, focuses on climate adaptation. There's also studies that focus on how we can become lower carbon impact toward this carbon neutral goal, which is a very recent commitment. All of those plans are meant to flow together and flow out through Imagine Boston. So part of what we do at City Hall every day is look at these plans, which optimize often for a particular element, and think about how can they work together most productively to create a sum of the parts that is great, a whole that is greater than some of its parts. And so that is a big part of what we think about. So for example, in the areas in which we're likely to grow in the city, what does that look like from a transportation standpoint? What does that look like from a climate readiness standpoint? What does that look like from a climate mitigation standpoint where we're reducing our greenhouse gases? And you're absolutely right. If we end up with more people, our per capita emissions will have to go down even more than they did if we had flatline growth. And so actually one city, so this is an announcement the mayor made that many cities locally have actually also made together, which is super cool. Somerville is an area that's done a bunch of work on this as well, and sort of begins to think about what would be necessary to achieve this goal. We have a lot of work that we can build on that's already been done. This is also a new goal that the mayor just announced, and so there's a bunch of work that's just kicking off at the moment about what will it take to get us there. So I'm super excited to dig into that more, and you'll see more of that coming out in the next little bit. We very much want all of that work to be grounded in data, and that is something that Climate Ready Boston has a lot of data behind every statement that's made, and we want that to be true also for our approach to making sure that we get to carbon neutral by 2050.
And if you are curious about all those plans, at the bottom of our homepage, they're all listed and they all have clickable links, so you can download all the reports and do a ton of reading.
I'm happy to answer more questions on any of those or put you in touch with folks who know lots about it. One more question, then we'll transition. Other questions? Yes, we did. Perfect. Okay.
I just just wanted to mention that other thing too. Use the term standard of living. Is that, and I think of quality of life, which may be different from standard of living, talks is like a money measurement, right? But I think, again, in the spirit of this trade-off thing, you know, when you have this growth, you know, the cost of housing goes up, the time in traffic congestion goes up, the per capita open space
We're
goes
talking about
down.
all these things that are addressed. I can't tell you the number of things that you're just mentioning that we spend a lot of time on when we think about this plan. So one of the things that is a big topic that we've thought a lot about is as the population of Boston grows, we want to have per capita green space that stays steady. We actually have to add whole football fields and more in order to keep us steady. And so some of these things, as you get more density, you begin to think about what is it that is our true goal as we're trying to figure this out? What leads to that kind of quality of life? And of the 5 goals that I mentioned that Imagine Boston is focused on, the first one actually has quality of life in the core component of that. And then becomes the question, great, what are the components of quality of life that we can really optimize for, given the fact that lots and lots of people want to call Boston home. So happy to take more of that discussion offline, but you are putting your finger on a topic we think a lot about.
Good.
So with that, I want to transition briefly to what are the things, so the mayor has said very clearly that we are an immigrant-friendly city, and that part of our vision of the next 15 years is to make sure that we are able to support our immigrants fully. And we want this not to just be something that comes via us sitting at a blackboard, but something that comes from our community. That's already been the approach of our Office of Immigrant Advancement for a long time. But wanted to open up the floor here for any thoughts or questions. They're very much, I assume, reasons that you came here today. And I'm curious for what those thoughts are that brought you here. And I'd love to get a diversity of voices. So anyone who hasn't spoken, maybe take the floor first. Any thoughts? Yeah.
So I haven't had a chance to read the first draft of the report, so forgive my ignorance, but you know, in just listening to this report and thinking about the fact that immigrants are a driving force in our economy, also the fact that immigrants are more likely to be business owners and entrepreneurs. So a lot of the work that I'm seeing in the city of Boston, especially around entrepreneurship, whether it's incubators and accelerators, a lot of that is focused in places where immigrants don't really reside. And so what is the plan to kind of focus those efforts on supporting immigrant entrepreneurs in those places like Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, East Boston, Chinatown, since, you know, their immigrants are twice as likely to be business owners.
Did everyone hear? Would a one sentence summary be good? It looks like we're getting on. So, question about the geographic support for immigrants, given that immigrants are more likely to be business owners and entrepreneurs. So this is a topic that we are newly discussing. So we had a meeting 2 weeks ago, I want to say, with some of our land use planners to think about the city as a whole and where do things happen, not just now, but going forward. And the amazing head of our Office of Immigrant Advancement is saying, hey, are there land use principles that we need to be thinking about as we plan forward? That doesn't get exactly to your entrepreneurship component, because a lot of those pieces are run out of our economic development department, but that's sort of piece 1. Piece 2 is that a lot of the economic development that we're very much focused on is focused on entrepreneurship and small business. There's a bunch of new and interesting organizations throughout the city that are doing interesting work trying to make sure that our startup fields, our entrepreneurship fields are representative of the diversity of Boston as a whole. Other people in the room may have been in conversations about thinking about where that is geographically. I want to.
Just a quick point is that some effort to support worker-owned cooperatives has sprouted in East Boston, so we're looking to get more involved.
And I know that the Office of Economic Development has also been, not specifically towards immigrant populations, but towards small business owners, trying to figure out ways where there could be an easier path to all of the resources that exist within the city to help small business owners get started and get additional supports as they need it. And obviously, because such a big population of our small business owners are immigrants, that obviously impacts that population as well.
We also, one of the services that's been offered by the city, it's sort of especially championed by Mayor Walsh. Excuse me, so that's her. Sorry, I'm trying to hear this. Anyways, we have, she wants to say. One of the offices that we have as one of the services we have in the city is also our Office of Neighborhood Services, where they specifically have liaisons for both communities within the city as proper neighborhoods, and also as some of our largest immigrant populations. So for example, we have a Haitian Mattapan liaison where she has, she can certainly speak to Mattapan as an individual community and its small business needs, but also speaks fluent Haitian Creole and is from Haiti herself. So she's able to work with that community. We, as of last year, brought in a Vietnamese liaison who could speak to that community. Anybody who's been to Fields Corner is very familiar with what an important part of the small business fabric that they are part of. So we do, and they can help those business owners, especially that office also handles and especially licensing cases. So say you're a small restaurant owner, and I think it's fair to say that Boston is one of the absolute best cities in the country just because of the wide array of small business restaurants that we have that especially focus on immigrant cuisine. Depending on what neighborhood you're in, you were able to access somebody on average who speaks the same language as you, who can help you, figure out the process of opening up your restaurant or your small business or something like that. And there's a lady in the back also who can answer.
So my first question is, how did you learn about this? And because there's an answer coming behind that in terms of how we get the information to you that you're interested. So how did you learn about this session tonight?
So I work for a community development corporation. So that's how I learned.
Okay, so did you know about Commonwealth Kitchen on Quincy Street? That's an incubator for food businesses. They have equipment and space and freezers and a KitchenAid bigger than I am. And a young lady was featured on Rachel Ray's show today. She had a brain tumor, and while she was recovering or waiting for a diagnosis as to what they were going to do, she started making ice cream. And so she's featured on Rachel Ray's show today because she has a small business that she runs. She makes her ice cream at that incubator, Commonwealth Kitchen, Quincy Street, between Blue Hill Avenue and Columbia Road in Dorchester. There is the maker space at the Roxbury Innovation Center, and they have 3D printers and all kinds of techy things I don't even know how to describe. In Upham's Corner, very soon there will be another maker space, small business incubator. So I think people are interested, and I think there are resources there. I think what we don't have is a really great way of making sure people know where the opportunities are. Maybe that's the work that we need to do, but the city is hugely putting a lot of resources into making information really accessible. So if you don't know, just go cityofboston.gov and search. And there will be some information there and somebody that you can talk to. And then get that information out to communities, like through the liaisons and the word of mouth and the way that we all, get that information.
And we can always get better. So if you have thoughts about ways to do that better, we are constantly learning. So one thing, just as we take notes for the future, thinking about geographical concentration of resources that are particularly helpful for immigrants. Other thoughts, ideas? Go for it.
So
question. I know a lot, and you talked about this earlier as well, there are a lot of people coming in the city of Boston during the day from mostly areas like Chelsea, who are immigrants and are not living in Boston because it's not really affordable for them. So when we talk about affordable housing, are we talking about making it affordable for them to come to Boston every day? And if we're not talking about affordable housing for them, then how are we looking to support them who come every day to Boston for their work?
So we largely think about affordability in two categories, and possibly more than that, but I'll start with two. One is affordable housing. So if you're living in Boston, how is it possible, given however much money you have and you're living on, to be able to make ends meet with that kind of housing? And we obviously have a supply-demand issue, and that lots of people want to make Boston home. And we have a housing stock with a very restricted land budget. Many components of our land budget are not moving, like our streets and our parks and our sort of historical institutions. And so the question is, how do we make sure there's enough housing for everyone, given that we have more people and very limited land? So that's piece one. Piece two, which may be particularly relevant for your Chelsea example, is affordable commercial spaces. So for our small businesses, when the cost of housing goes up because land prices are going up, well, guess what else goes up? The cost of rent, usually, for small businesses, or even taxes for people who own. So here we often think about residents who have fixed incomes and then end up paying more taxes. What does that look like for them? And so one of the areas that we're increasingly thinking about creative solutions are in order to keep commercial rent also affordable, so that our small businesses stay in the communities that they're in and are able to continue to thrive and function there. When we think about affordability, I'll give you one more snippet, and I'm happy to have a longer conversation because this is a full conversation that we are having as a city, and it's a huge focus of our leadership time right now. When we think about affordability, we largely think about three buckets of things. First of all, there's the just plain supply-demand thing. If you got more people, ideally you also want to have more places for them to live. So one thing that we're doing is trying to add more units of housing to meet that set of more people. We're actually at a place where some of our rents are stabilizing because we believe that we are actually getting closer to a good spot there. However, we predict that our population is going to continue to grow, and therefore that our housing needs are going to continue to grow there as well. The second thing that we try and do is make sure that the housing that we can have for people for whom that market rate doesn't work is able to be able to function for those families or households at a rate that works. And so oftentimes that means using a mechanism that is not fully market driven. So taking some things out of the market or out of the profit motive. Sometimes that means things like a density bonus. So if developers are building 10 stories high and they want to go higher, if they build more, then we need a certain percentage affordable. Or when you're a certain height, 10 stories, but they're higher, there's a certain number of units that are required to be affordable. Those come in different classes, different percentages that we benchmark on a floating benchmark. Then there's a whole other category of things that we think about in part of the Boston Housing Authority. That's something that you can get on a list and get access to sort of capital A affordable housing. So we're trying to bolster all of those and add on a fourth category, which is eviction prevention and anti-displacement work for people who are already in their houses but are facing pressures. So happy to talk more about all of those, and in the really thick report over there, we also outline sort of the specific things under each of those that we're trying to do. But frankly, it's a tricky thing, and so we're sort of trying all the tools that we have, and it doesn't mean that it's suddenly.
You also, so you specifically mentioned Chelsea. I actually used to live in Chelsea. I went to a local area university, and then I couldn't afford at the time to live in Boston, so I lived in like the world's worst apartment in Somerville for about a summer. And then I lived in Chelsea for about a year. My rent was super affordable. My commute was like 2 hours long. And then I was lucky enough to get paid just enough where I could come back and live in Boston. One of the programs that I heard about when I started working for the city and that we've been trying to push out is the Boston Home Center. And this is a really, really cool part of the city. It was established in like, I think 1996, where basically they specifically focus on getting people to start considering home ownership in the city. If you go on Redfin, like I do every once in a while, and you're like, what's an average price for a house? Like you'll like look down and like get really sad, and then you look at it again, and you're like, hey, no, I gotta find something. What the Home Center does, it has home buying 101 courses. So especially if you're like a first-time home buyer, if you're even considering buying a home and you want to have a more structured approach, they offer free classes for people to be able to go. If you hit certain income thresholds, you can qualify for, I believe it's a 3% payment of your mortgage. That's a loan from the state that's very low interest. And if you're like me 2 years ago, you're like, I'm not going to do this program. I could be moving out of here. I could get my dream job in like 2 years. Don't worry, the state gets the money back when you sell the house, because you're going to sell the house. Look at this market. So if you're thinking about home ownership, if you have friends who are thinking about the program, especially they're working on making this program offered in more languages. Right now it's primarily in English, so if you have a buddy who that is interested in home ownership, but English isn't their first language, if you could help them, that would be incredible. But they help introduce you to lenders, they help you qualify for this program, and even when you start, you say you want to get a fixer-upper, they have access to like up to, I think, $10,000 or $20,000 in home repair. That's like a 10% loan. That's a loan with no interest over 10 years.
And what is it?
So they're all over the city. We try to get different neighborhoods, and there's different.
Boston
Sure,
Home Center.
the Boston Home Center. It's through our Department of Neighborhood Development, which is one of the main organizations that helps finance and plan for affordable housing in the city. So,
And if you're ever not sure how to find something that you think there are resources or you think there should be resources, if you just call 311 and you say, hey, I'm thinking of buying a house, or hey, I'm a small business and I need some help, they will find you the person who knows how to help anywhere in the city on that. So you don't even have to remember any of this, you just 311. You can ask your question. And even if you don't know if the city does it or not, if you're have difficulty shoveling and you have an elderly neighbor, you can call that for that too. So, other thoughts, questions?
Just thinking about the income distribution and in terms of Alvaro's presentation on where immigrants live, and I think that is driven by affordability as much as being in a neighborhood of folks that you feel comfortable around. But there was an article on Boston Business Journal today that there are more CEOs in Boston than there are plumbers. And that speaks a lot to, I think, the income divide. And how do we think we're going to get to a point where there's a little more parity in what people earn? If you're the doctor who's driving a cab, what's your career path? How long do you drive that cab before you start to get back to where you were? And isn't that the work that we should be about?
I mean, one of the big changes that happened in workforce development with Mary Walsh and Twin was we had a system where we had a focus on getting people in the labor market. In general, on entry-level job that you couldn't support your family, and then we'll look for the next one. So I think that the city changed that. I think that the field is changing that from that kind of throwing people in the labor market and then let's go back, or if they stay there, they get stuck, to career path and see, so how is that you move them within a company or across an industry in a career. And I think that it's a reform that the whole field is going through it. The schools are starting to say, Bunker Hill Community College, for example, they have a nurse practitioner course, so that you get out of there, you are a nurse, and they know that there are jobs, and that jobs in this field are growing So I think that there is a whole restructuring, partly because the federal government created these programs where you had to check the box of placement to get more money for placement, and recently they changed from, the placement thing is not working. You should place folks, but you should make them advance, because if not, you just place them. And there was some study showing that actually was not you place them on their start, was kind of a revolving door. So they go to one job and then go to the other job and then go to the other job, but they are all in the same space. So I think that is changing, and therefore it will be how you move people. The Boston economy, it's a complicated one because we have medical, biotech, higher education. So on one side, it's dream. On the other side, the level of education of that economy is pretty high. So it's a complicated balance of how you do that, and the career path is a way of advancing. On the immigrant that is a tax driver, he would drive that tax forever if there is no immigration reform, because he cannot leverage his diploma. He can't go to school, and in the states where they were very successful in solving this problem, they had in-state tuition, so you could go to university and get out of the tax drive, not as a doctor, but when you work on some other job. So it's a difficult problem how to solve. And I think it's, and I think the cities we look to compare with Boston, the economy of Boston, because it's very healthy, solves part of the problem. For example, the medical with nurses, and so we can absorb this. On other places where you have more rural agriculture, there is a big problem, because it's not that you cannot move people up, there is no up. It's just cheap labor in agriculture.
The other thing I'll say is we've got the interesting thing that the bounds of Boston are very oddly drawn, and we've got sort of greater Boston overall. So a lot of our high earners actually live outside of Boston and commute into work. So the numbers look very different if you talk about Boston residents versus if you talk about Boston workers based on what time of the day they're in Boston. And so you actually see that people who live in Boston often have the lower paying jobs, and people who live outside of Boston and work in Boston often have the higher paying jobs. One other just interesting data fluke whenever you read articles like the one today is that we have a very high Gini coefficient, a very high inequality number. One of the interesting parts of that is we have a lot of high earners in the bounds, who live in the bounds of the city of Boston, but we also have a very high percentage of low earners, and that's not by accident. That's in fact city policy and government policy, because we have tried to preserve so much affordable housing. So the amount of Boston Housing Authority units that we have is by percentage way higher than almost any other city of our size by huge percentage points. I don't have the exact numbers here, so I don't want to quote wrong, but it's shockingly sizable. And so partly we have a high Gini coefficient by design. We want that lower end, and we do a whole lot of things and put a lot of money behind keeping it that way, which is just an interesting sort of background piece.
Just to add to that, it's around 20% the stock of affordable housing in Boston, and it's a malicious process, because in a way what that policy did was to Boston has the function of housing the poor of the region. So nobody built low-income housing. We have that function. By design, because we have this function, every census we have more low-income folks because we are building more houses. And if you are in Newton, you're not building any house. So it's, and I think it's a problem that, I mean, there's a huge discussions in the city of looking, and I think that the mayor and Chief Barros made some dent on that, on trying to convince other mayors that the housing market is a regional market. You can't solve the problem in Boston. You can aggravate the problem because you are building more and more housing. You know, we are all liberals, we feel good about that, but from a point of view of urban design, it's not a good thing. And I think they made some inroads on getting the region to start to think about how we solve that collectively. Where this is really malicious is in LA, where some counties ship their homeless to LA. And so if people go to downtown LA and say, wow, man, there's lots of homeless. Yeah, why don't you come send their homeless to LA? And we do that with low-income housing in Washington region.
Yeah, so regional solutions. One more question, knowing that we're close to 8.
So, yeah, I just want to say we are close to 8 and we like to be timely with everyone's time. Sorry, that was an awkward sentence. But, yeah, we'll take one last question and then we can, some of us can stay longer if there's some personal discussions.
Just a quick one. I'm just curious how much the private sector has been involved in the planning process, and I'd just be really happy to hear, I'm hoping that they're involved, especially with the job training and getting immigrants into the workforce. Yeah, absolutely. So two sort of components of that question. One is, how much has the private sector been involved in the Imagine Boston plan looking forward-looking? And secondly, how much is the private sector involved in implementing all of the policies that we're talking about, whether it's economic development, immigrant advancement, or a whole range of other things. So piece one is we're actually holding over the next 3 weeks a whole series of roundtables about how Boston can support different economic sectors over the next 15 to 30 years. What will it take to support, whether it's eds or meds or small businesses or the startup sector we talked about? What are the pieces that they believe are the barriers right now for the things that we're worried about that actually the city can help with? So that's sort of an interesting piece about, when everyone's thinking about themselves for the future, what does that look like? We've done a lot of talking to residents, also businesses and private sector. Second piece around implementation. There's been a lot of engagement, especially of businesses that want to be involved in education about pairing up with schools and getting people onto pathways for jobs. So there's a overall goal for us that we want to educate people all the way from pre-K all the way through careers, and we don't want that to be a sort of choppy ladder. One of the key ways of doing that is being involved in the school system in a way that gets people the skills that they need in order to be in the workforce and the ability to communicate to others that they have the skills that they need to be in the workforce. And so having a lot of our companies work with and mentor students and provide summer job training, which is a big area of focus. I think we currently offer summer jobs for about half of the students who might want it that are eligible for this program. But if we could double that, we could actually get almost everyone who would qualify into these kinds of programs. One of the big predictors of being able to be in a good job is actually summer job training, being able to have an internship over the summer. And so those are sort of two very sort of economic development, economic mobility ways that the private sector has been involved. But there are like climate resilience is another area where there's a huge leading force via our Green Ribbon Commission. They've sort of been the bulwark that a lot of this goes to and gets processed through and helps to think about, and a lot of our sort of the prompt for a lot of these things. So, happy to talk more. Thank you all for being here. And,